very eloquent and informed and militant stuff. I now come to expect from you, from mine. But just, I'm going to open it up, and like I said, there's all you guys have got, very informed, and actually all of you could be on this panel as well and make great contributions. So I'm going to open up in just a few seconds. Just a few connections, actually. It came out recently in the mainstream media. I don't know if people remember hearing, but it was admitted now by both parties that the volunteers of the Irish Republican Army, the freedom fighters in that organisation, were trained in South Africa by the armed wing of the ANC, Umkhonto Sizwe, who were the leadership of the Black Revolution in South Africa, but there were others as well. The Black Consciousness Movement, Dan Glass touched upon, who had some connection with the Pan-African Congress, who played a very important role in that struggle as well. So we have this constant affinity, this constant coming to each other's assistance in the international struggle. In the American context, I think it's interesting because I forget what the exact connection was with Bolivar, but I know internationally the Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint Overthrow, was absolutely fundamental to the ending of the industrial genocide against our native peoples of the Americas and African people who were kidnapped en masse and taken to the other continent. The Haitian Revolution, I think Toussaint actually teamed up with Bolivar, and there was some discussion between them. Perhaps someone can know what the exact nature of that strategic relationship was, so there was that as well. And the only time I personally really heard in the English language with people with light skin talk seriously about the struggle of the Americas was about 5 years ago. I was at a National Youth Congress of Sinn Fein Youth, whereby one of the, maybe, I don't know if you guys remember the Columbia Three? The members of Sinn Fein who went to Colombia to meet up, let's say, with our revolutionaries in Colombia and have some strategic discussions with them. They were caught by the Colombian authorities and eventually they were returned home. But one of the Colombian Three spoke at that conference, and there was another veteran struggler in Sinn Fein, an elderly comrade, who was trying to inculcate the members of the conference with the lessons of the revolutionary processes in South America and what they can learn in the Irish example. And when you have a serious movement like the Irish, you have serious strategical discussion, obviously, as well. I mean, one thing I would like Sister Esther to come back in the Q&A, in the discussion that we're going to have. I'm just going to start off the Q&A. We're going to have to answer right now. We'll take a few more. But this concept of internal colonies within the West, I think, is interesting. Because for a long while, I too identified with that analysis. And I know the Black Panthers did develop that analysis as well, as internalized internal colonies within the imperialist structure. But as we move historically and advance our struggle internationally, can we still call ourselves internal colonies? I mean, just my mum always used to just have a go at me when I used to consider myself English. She says, you know, you're not English. The English will never accept you as English. And anyway, they didn't come to civilize us. We've come to civilize them. But to move forward on the demographic level as well, how do we then reanalyze our position, not as minorities? We never were minorities, if you look at an international context, but even within the English context, where now we are a majority in many parts of London as people of the Global South, how do we reevaluate that? So that's something I just wanted to throw out there. But before I ask questions, I just want to thank the brothers who have cooked this evening. There is some fantastic food in the kitchen, ready to be eaten. And I hope you're not going to get impatient with the Q&A and the discussion. Therefore, but there's some good food that we're going to bring out just immediately after the discussion that we're going to have. But also, you know, I've asked for a contribution of at least £5 per person. I'm not going to ask you to put it into anything, but I'm going to ask you just to give it to me if you don't mind. But I'm asking at least £5 because this room itself cost nearly £250. We spent another £100 on the food. So don't worry, we'll make up the shortfall, but please do contribute the best you can. So now I'm going to open it up, and I know there's going to be you know, a lot of people here who are going to say some interesting things, so please start before I pick on someone. Go on, Adam.
I want to ask the Basque brother, what kind of things the Basque exile community in London are doing that we can get involved with, and if there's any scope for any possibility for Spanish Republican minded people to also get involved with that.
Before you come, I'll take a few more. Yeah. Thanks for that. Anyone else? I know all of you got something thinking in your head. Mustafa?
Are you looking for a question specifically?
No, I'm looking for contributions. I don't mind contributions.
Well, I have one question, maybe possibly one contribution.
Go for it.
The question is to understand, because I have to plead ignorance. I apologize for that. I'm trying to understand the nature of the conflict between the Spanish government and the Basques. Is it primarily ideological in the sense that you have different conceptions of what constitutes the correct way to live? Or is it actually framed in possibly different terms, maybe ethnic, cultural, tribal, or something like that? So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate that. In terms of a possible contribution, it's a kind of response to the last thing I think you said, Sukant, about the issue of kind of South diaspora situation where there are multiple and increasing numbers of minorities that are rapidly transforming into demographic majorities. What does that actually mean? My possible contribution is to make a distinction between quantitative majorities and qualitative majorities. I think, 1 billion times 0 is still 0. That may sound harsh, but if I look at it from this perspective, that many of the people who are prepared to prop up Wall Street and the City of London are actually of very dark hue. So demographics are not really relevant. What is relevant is, I think, the point that Esther Stanford was making about possibly the more important aspect of the reparations movement, which is the transformation of self. And it's something that increasing number of scholars in a region of the world which unfortunately is referred to as Latin America or South America, they are talking about the importance of decolonialism as an intellectual, spiritual, economic, philosophical, cultural and other oriented movement. And they have a very interesting conceptualization of the world system as a colonial matrix of power that has multiple dimensions to it. And so the focus on, for example, the economics, i.e. framing things in terms of class struggle, or looking at things in terms of cultural decolonization is limiting. That it needs to be looked at holistically and approached in a systemic framework. And for me...
Can you guys hear Mustafa?
Sorry. Yeah. So for me, the operational classification in the context of quantitative majorities that may still be qualitative minorities because we don't exercise power, maybe the need to understand systemic wholes, how they function, what they are, correctly identify the nature of the beast, and then attempt to effect essentially first stage of decolonization, which is, I guess, cognitive, spiritual, etc. And that should then manifest in more external forms, i.e. institutional changes, the ability to organize, strategic alignments, coalition building, etc.
Thanks, Mustafa. Great. Next. Sister?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Chavez was a great example, and in as much as we'd all want to see change through peaceful means, how typical does the panel think what happened in Venezuela is? Can occupied territories, neo-colonial states, really be transformed through peaceful means on a wide scale?
Thanks, Esther. Anyone else before Anyone else want to respond to the questions as well? a moment. You're being way too shy. Sister?
I suppose I wanted to just to touch and develop on that really, because from the contribution again focusing on the reparations, it's really to ask about how would it be possible to gain reparations when Europe and its allies, but basically imperialism, holds everything. They're not going to hand it over. And if we shout about it, they're not just going to give it up. But the only way that can happen is if there's a complete transformation, overthrow of imperialism. The two can't sit together. And certainly, how we see it, I'm speaking from the African Social International, our perspective would be that it would have to be an overthrow of that style of government and operation. So we're talking about revolutionary transformation. I don't know if it can happen peacefully, but it'd be good if there's some other response to that. But also with the question of reparations, if it's what is due, then there doesn't have to be any thoughts necessarily about, well, there's enough for everybody. There always has been enough for everybody. The fact is that a few people have taken it all from people who then have to buy it back at a price that Europe has dictated. So we're just going round and round in circles at the moment, where Europe is totally in control, and African people and Asian people and other colonised people aren't. So I'd say that the main contradiction is around the colonial question, I suppose, if that's...
Great contribution, thanks, Esther. I'm going to take the panel now to respond. Do you want to respond first to Brother Mustafa's question of, is it ideological or ethnic or cultural? What is the nature of the antagonism?
The nature of the conflict is the failure of the Spanish and French states to establish themselves as nation states. Spain is a state, but there is not only one culture inside it. There is different cultures which have been living together for a long time and which have been asking for their own rights. The issue in Basque Country was called this, I don't like the word, but the founder of the modern nationalistic Basque Party said it was an ethnic issue. Nowadays we say it's about the identities and cultures. So I feel Basque. I don't do the same, and I don't see the world in the same way as a person from Madrid or Granada or Barcelona does. And I want to decide with the people who serve my culture on how do I want to organize my society. For the Spanish state, that's anathema. Spain is one, Spain is big, and Spain is only two. So that's the nature of the conflict with the Spanish side. In the French side, it's more of the same. The Jacobin state doesn't understand. Even France is one of the only states in the Council of Europe that has not endorsed the minority languages chart, because the only language that's spoken in the Hexagon is French, which is Lai, there is Catalan, there is Basque, there is Occitanian, but for them, France is one and all the citizens of France are one. So the main thing is about identity feelings. It's not ethnical for us nowadays. Basque is whoever lives, works or studies in the Basque Country and feels Basque. Full stop. That's the only thing you need to be Basque.
Yeah, it's on the same thing. So would you say that you are coming from some sort of different tribe? Because you're saying just cultural, but then you're saying that you have different points of, different perspective of the life, and you have different language, etc. So you think that your origin is different than the...
The origin of Basque people is different from the origin of the rest of people. That's a clear point. But I don't do the separation on whether people serve my genetical background or not. I do it on whether people lives in the same place as I do and serves the same cultural values.
Yeah, obviously there's no genetical
there is no
differentiation anyway.
There is, and you will, if you go and you Google Basque genetical whatsoever, you will find there is thousands of studies. They say that we are so different. Blah, blah. No. For us, the fact is whoever lives and feels Basque. And what does it mean? I won't be able to explain it in 5 minutes. But it means having a different cosmovision. Full stop. Yeah.
Could I respond to that? That's a very interesting answer for me. Extremely important, because discussing with one of the Congolese representatives here and speaking to Sister Esther earlier and listening to her speech, is there seems to be a very interesting tension and you mentioned, you used terms like internationalist struggle, you referred to Hugo Chavez as an internationalist. What I hear here is not a commitment to nationalism or a commitment to internationalism, but almost a kind of issue about identity politics or tribalism, and I know that has very bad connotations, but I'm looking at it in a quite neutral sense, that this is a people who have chosen to identify themselves in a particular way. It doesn't seem to be kind of biologically reductive, you know, that people can, for example, if I say I want to be a Basque, can I join?
If you come to live in the Basque
Country. If I come to live, there,
study, work, yeah,
that's what I'm saying. So I will, the reason I'm making a lot of this point is earlier you mentioned this, portion of the Quran, God created us into tribes that we may come to, you mentioned, know each other. It's got a much deeper meaning than that. It's so that we reciprocally recognize each other. Not you have to recognize me because I'm a supremacist power and you are a dominated power, but there's a kind of horizontal mutual recognition. So that is a very, very interesting issue, that there's a fluidity. It's like there's a membrane there. I can become a Basque if I identify with what they identify with. But there seems to be a tension between that view and a nationalist view. For example, brother, he's talking about Spain kind of trying to homogenize all people in the formation of a national identity. The similar things happen with my wife, who's Turkish. And essentially that was the Kemalist experiment, taking a European idea and then projecting it. And what worries me, and maybe Sister Esther got a very different conception of nationhood here, in which case I want to hear it, because this brother here is talking about identity politics and the failure of nationalism, and yet the case seems to be made here about the importance of nationalism for nation building for a disenfranchised people as part of global reparations. So I apologise for taking extra time, but trying to effect a bridge between.
I'm going to pause it. I think the brother there is probably going to intervene in this particular issue. Is that right?
I'm going to try and clarify in kind of less than 5 minutes. It's a combination of both things. It's a nationalist struggle because there is a link that makes that nation, and that link is the language. The language does give you the way into the culture, and that what makes the nation, and that's the integral part. And the denial from both France and Spain of the entity of the culture per se is what causes the struggle. And the Spanish culture per se is something artificial. It's made up. It's actually non-existent per se. There isn't a clear Spanish identity. It's a combination of different things. But and that's part of the struggle, and it's been imposed. And we are in a process, and I'm really curious about this whole movement of reparation, because we are in need very much of more than reparation. Is turning around about 60, 70 years of fascism that we still bear. Is pure raw fascism. And if you just turn on the news nowadays, what's going on in Spain, you'd be shocked. Because we have been sold for about 30, 40 years the concept of some democracy, that it's actually non-existent. And we are having to play that game, because there's no other way. And we've been sold the concept of accountability in the politicians that we have, and it's non-existent. There are many, many, many cases of corruption, the extreme to the extreme, that are going unanswered, and they've been taken to tribunals and blatantly lie and say, oh, I didn't do that. when it's documented, when its cases is well documented. So that I think it is coming to a point where it's going to burst, and it's going to burst probably in Madrid, because it's themselves that actually have the main problem when it comes to Spain. And as a result, we are pushing our corner, but it's going to come once now we perhaps taking the spotlight off of us, as we are no longer in an armed conflict and what have you, is the turn of the Spanish people that actually going to have to pick up the struggle, and they're going to have to be the protagonist of this process of reparation and process of reverse of the wrongs of history. And it is the ball is in their court, and they're going to have to live up to it soon enough, I think.
Thanks for that. Sister, do you want to come back? I think there's 3 points, 3 questions or contributions that people, particularly the sisters, wanted to raise. There was the issue of demographics, qualitative and quantitative, mean times 0 is a 0, etc. That's the first thing. Second thing is peaceful change. Can we achieve it through peaceful change? And that's connected to the last point from the sister saying, isn't the struggle for reparations a struggle about changing the whole, overthrowing the whole system by revolutionary change?
Okay. On the demographics question and this whole notion, which I think you began around, just questioning the notion of internal colonies and neo-colonies and so forth, I still think it's relevant, because even if we talk about our demographics in the UK and where in certain areas we are so-called majorities, I'm taking the point that my brother here at the front has raised in terms of the distinction between quantitative and qualitative majorities, and I think that's a key distinction that we have to make, because even though we may numerically outnumber in certain London boroughs in particular, the reality is the framework within which we're operating is still a colonial framework. You know, in terms of, if we look at certainly many areas where you find people of African Caribbean heritage, you know, we look at who owns the shops, it's not our communities. We look at the kind of economic systems, we see what's happening on a global scale with our continent actually happening in London boroughs and other boroughs within the British Isles. So again, I keep emphasising this notion of us being a neo-colony, but I don't mean that in the way in which, for instance, you have some African groups in America who see themselves as being a colony by themselves that's almost, well, kind of separated or distinct from the colonial situation of African people globally. And so there's been a movement in the US in particular that is a reparations struggle that talks about what they call the Black Belt, or 5 states in the USA, you know, that should be developed as a country in essence. That is a reparations struggle. And they talk about being new Africans, and it's a phase of the new African struggle. Now, I'm not necessarily, even though I support that struggle, my feeling is that our struggle as people of African heritage has to be connected to the wider African people struggle, and it must be about reclaiming the homeland Africa, and that we are sites of that. So they are variations of the same thing. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of analysis. It's been a political struggle. Many of the freedom fighters within that movement have also been incarcerated, demonized, terrorized, and all of that. And it also shows what the threat is when we dare, within these sites of imperialism, to attempt to even envision a different way and try and organize on that basis. And so it's something that I think we have to understand and learn from, and take the best from those kinds of struggles too. I think the real question is, how do we then conscientize and transform the reality of the majority of us here? That's the real problem that we face, because the systems that we're talking about, whether we're talking about global white supremacy, whether we're talking about imperialism, colonialism, etc., a lot of the time you will see it is also us now upholding these systems and giving them life. And so we have to also wage that internal struggle amongst our own peoples as well. Moving on to the whole question around is a peaceful transition possible? Personally, I don't believe so. You know, it's not been borne out by history, and I'm not an idealist at the end of the day. I'm a pragmatic person and a realist, and I think throughout all people's struggles for, you know, to really transform their condition as opposed to tinker with it with mere reforms, there has at some stage been a resort to armed struggle. And that is actually a right in international law for a people who are denied their right to self-determination. There is a right to actually wage a struggle, which may take the form of armed struggle in order to restore self-determination and nationhood and peoplehood, etc. On the question of the colonial nature of some of the reparations frameworks, I agree with the point that my sister made, that in essence, reparations, if it's truly to be reparations, if it's truly about repairing the damage, it means that we cannot maintain and replicate an oppressive system and the same systems of domination. So it has to be anti-capitalist, it has to be anti-imperialist, it has to be anti-white supremacist, and that can't happen without a fundamental revolution and transformation. However, again, taking the pragmatic approach to it, we also see reparations as being a process. And so wherever people join that struggle, like for some people, even myself, when I first came to reparations, it was because of the way it was being reported in the mainstream media at that time as being a battle for compensation. And as a lawyer, I wanted to be a part of and dedicate my legal skills to that struggle. But it was getting on board the movement that I realised, actually, that approach is not going to work, because what does it mean? They can print the money and give us if they want to. What does it mean when we actually haven't built alternative frameworks, alternative institutions? It means whatever we have goes right back to them. And so the process of being involved in the repairs means that we ourselves transform our even understanding of what it is that we're fighting for, what it is that we're about, and the different tactics that we use. But I think the most important thing is that people join the journey somewhere. And through that joining the journey, we also struggle with each other to raise our consciousness. And in the process of raising our consciousness, we're also building our internal capacity and power. Ultimately, it's about power. And we're not there yet. And so even in the conversation, I think it's a useful start, but ultimately it is about fundamental transformation. I just want to touch on, I think, again, the tension that you raised. And for us, in particular, I'm talking about PARCO, we see the whole question around nation building in a different way to how it's been used in the West, which is about nation building tied to territory and also replicating systems of domination. What we're really talking about is African and indigenous concepts of nation building, which are broader concepts that are transformative, and they are based on really the nation being about the people. And yes, part of that is tied to land. So yes, it's not just etheric and we're just all floating off in the sky somewhere. Land is important to that. Language and culture is important to that. But the borders that separate us are what we see as being part of the systems of domination that we need to overcome. So in that sense, I think it's a more expansive vision or cosmovision as to what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a person, what it means to be of a particular nationality. And it means it's also about restoring not only our interactions with each other as people, but and members of the human family, but it's also about restoring or repairing how we as human beings relate to our earth, our mother, and also the planet. And so it's about a reciprocal relationship, again, that I think Indigenous peoples have always had in terms of who we are, and it's kind of linked to the concept of being a vicegerent. You know, we are stewards in that sense. So it's a slightly different.
It's not like a European state.
Yeah.
This is one state. Yeah.
Just want to, if it's okay, I want to come back just briefly on the demographic. I think all the questions that were asked actually has to be related to where we are at historically at this juncture today, because we're at a transitionary juncture of the history of the human race, whereby the global south is rising in strategic power. That's undeniable. That's been admitted now. What, 2013? That's been admitted for over a decade now. What they call the emerging nations, like we just emerged. Well, we were there a long time ago as the Europeans were emerging actually at a very low level of development, let's say diplomatically. So we're actually at a very sensitive moment of history where we can see the rise of the global south, but also we can see the growth population-wise of our people in the West, and we can see as in dealing with that challenge, imperialism and white supremacy, it understands that. That's why it brings Obama into the White House, right? That is the obvious strategy that's been there for a long time. It's always been there. The certificate of whiteness, the Spanish gave Native American people, so that they're literally a certificate of whiteness they were given. So they would do the dirty work of the colonialists, and that's increased as a strategy. But where I would disagree with Mustafa and kind of contend with what you're saying in terms of the qualitative, quantitative issue, I think where I would agree, yes, for me, I think this is the central battle, and I think that's what you said essentially as well, that there's no point going on about our politics if there's not an internal revolution, if there's not actually a self-reparations, I think you called it, the way you called it. But I think the way to illustrate what I'm saying most graphically is the resistance against the EDL that we've seen in the last several years. Whereas there's a problem of internalization of white supremacy and all of this that goes on, when the EDL, when the spiky nature of white supremacy was literally stomping down our streets and our communities, mostly our brothers actually fought them off. So that to me indicates that there is a contradiction and there is a tension, but when our people are actually tested in this very direct way, that they responded in the correct way actually, and in the way that is loyal to our people, and fought off the particularly nasty manifestation of white supremacy in that particular form. The other example are our communities in France, the global south communities in France. One brother of ours gets killed by the police in France, and our communities put the whole country on fire, right? That indicates to me that our people are not totally bought off, that they still have a lot of resistant potential that they can employ when the time is right to employ that. That doesn't mean to say that that danger isn't there. It's the primary danger that we face, in my opinion. But there is contradictions in our communities, and our job is to bring out the loyalty, the consistent loyalty of our peoples as well. And that's related to the peaceful change issue as well. Our enemy always brings the battle to us. We never bring the battle to our enemy. And perhaps that's because we're just very nice people. We're too nice, actually. If you look at our history, I remember when the Portuguese went to Brazil, what did the native Brazilians do in relation to the Portuguese? They didn't know of war and subjugation. And what they did, they walked onto the boats of the Portuguese that they first landed, and they looked around and they fell asleep on the boat. That's what they did. And time after time, even among South Asians in England, how generous we are with our food, for example, and our visitors. My father always jokes, he says, for the English, their home is their castle, but our homes for them is their curry houses. So time and time we're very nice. But anyway, the point is the enemy brings the battle to us. And to respond directly to what the sister is saying about the need for peaceful or militant change, is the historical test, and history is determined by us withstanding the way the enemy brings the fight to us. How is that manifested? It means winning the war in Libya, for example, which we lost. It means winning the war in Syria, It means winning all these battles that we're facing, and every country of the global south is facing those battles. Because the war is not over, it's covert most of the time, actually. So if we can win those battles, and there's many battles, there's the cultural battle, the economic battle, the straight up battle for sovereignty, which is tested with, if they go in against us in 1990 Iraq, or against Serbia in 99, or Afghanistan post 2001 and before, or Libya in 2011. We need to win these battles. And this is the international armed struggle that we're facing. This is the international armed struggle and revolution against white supremacy, and in line with the reparations as explained by Sister Esther. We need to win those battles, and unfortunately we don't quite win those battles. In Libya we lost, and as a result we've been devastated. But where we can stand our ground, like the Iraqi resistance for example, post 2003, we didn't win that battle, but we employed mass guerrilla warfare to bog down the enemy so much. And in the Iraqi context, it allowed other regions to rise up. And that is one of the main contributory reasons actually why South America could rise up, because the Iraqi patriots and those who came to defense of Iraq in the resistance bogged down the empire in that particular historical juncture there. So what I'm saying is we don't have to outright win a battle, but through people's war, protracted guerrilla warfare of our peoples, we can bog down, for example, what North Korea has done now, saying you touch us, we're going to nuke you, right? It's what happened is all of imperialism is focused on North Korea, which has freed up Syria a little bit and other regions a little bit. So if we can come to our defense in these ways, I think that is how the armed struggle in the international context is very positive. In the Venezuelan context, Chavez always from all of you. So please make your contribution. I'm thinking particularly of people like all of you actually, but particularly Jose comes to mind, Carlos comes to mind, Arash, and Amy and Pretty and Adam, and Daimur, who's come from Birmingham, I think, today. No? Yeah. Alright, sorry, I'm mistaken. So I'd like to hear from all of you guys and others as well. And you don't have to, obviously.
I just want to ask, following on from what you just said, what is the role of us here in the UK or London or England or whatever, as assorted white leftists, other communities against the state and so on? What is our role in terms of this global context?
Struggle harder, work harder. What else is there? Recruit more people, struggle harder, work harder. We know what we're doing. And so just to keep at it, that's what I would say straight off. I don't know what you guys would say. Hugo?
Be conscious of the fact that we are white leftists, that sometimes through our acts, as men for example, we do impose on others oppressions that we are not conscious of. That's often. Then struggle harder and try to overcome those oppressions. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, bro. Sister? Come on. Get up and do something.
Yeah, I mean, apart from that, I think it's also about playing your role in supporting the autonomous, independent movements of, you know, the various diasporas of the South that are in the UK. Because many representatives of these liberation struggles and liberation movements are here in Britain. And yes, we know what it is we're doing. We also know the kind of world that we want to bring about. And but it's going to also require, I think, the point about we have to recognise also our location and our privileges. And at a certain point, we're going to have to be prepared to give those up. Because if we divorce the struggles here from what's going on globally, yes, we will be trying to carve out a bigger piece of the global pie, but at the long run, we're going to end up hurting the very people that many of us are connected to and part of. So we cannot, you know, divorce whatever the struggles are, whether they're against cuts and austerity measures here, but that's got to be linked to the structural adjustment programs that many of our, you know, continents and countries have also been experiencing for decades. So ultimately, I think we all have to be prepared and expect that life for all of us is going to have to change radically if we're really going to have the kind of world that many of us are striving for, and I'm not sure if many of us are prepared for that yet.
Okay, Sister again?
Yes, I thought it was a very good question actually. The whole is around solidarity and white solidarity of colonised people's struggles. And certainly there is a big role, a significant role, and that is one of solidarity, and just as Sister Esther said, actually working with independent African or Asian, whichever sort of organisations, and we've seen that can work. We've also seen that there's been a lot of opportunism within the white left, and often wanting to support struggles abroad, elsewhere, that's quite far away. I mean, there's a war taking place in this country right now against poor people, yes, but in particular, and certainly over many years, African people. If we're looking at unemployment rates in the black community, far high, something like 45% within under 25s. There are just so many struggles that are dealing with right here and now, the whole war on drugs and how that's implanted in the African community. You can't find a job within the black community if you can get drugs. You can't find anything good within the community. So certainly there is a role there, and there is certainly solidarity organisations, one I know of, which is the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is one of the associations.
I just want to mention one thing, like I don't hear to no one talking about creation.
About?
Creativity. And I can bring you the answer for that peaceful way of achieving things. I don't mean it like to be a hippie or to be not any qualifications. I mean, as you say earlier, you mentioned it. If we all are humans, all of us, there is one thing like many people that's already, or not, many people know, or most of the people know, is like the 1%, the other 1% controls the 99%. But very few people did question that how they do that. And you get into the terms like when you know a bit, just a bit, how they do it. Then you can come to the terms of getting peaceful ways to be free. But you need to get free of the system, which is got millions of parts of activity in the mechanism. Like, for me, the main key is the education. And the way you grow a generation, the way it will be that society in the future. I mean, what I mean is, there is a way. But we have to find out which it is. We have to understand that. For me, there is.
Yeah, so firstly, just touching on your point on the link of Haiti and Venezuela. I had a conversation recently, so please do check, because I don't know how true it is. But I believe that after the Haitian Revolution, they donated ships and military assistance to Simon Bolivar. And then of recent, what happened was, in America, maybe it was Danny Glover or another leading actor, wanted to do a film about the Haitian Revolution. And Chavez was willing to donate money towards that.
Yeah, that's right.
So just linking in, on the main crux of what we're talking about right now, I want to ask, what challenges do you feel, as you describe us of the global south, might face amongst each other when it comes to unifying on different causes, and how do you feel we could potentially overcome them?
Thanks for that, Barbara. Anyone else this last round of contributions?
Yeah, I did finish that. Just to mention about the creativity. And at the end of the day, this everything we do in our lives
can do is to understand the relationship between class and race in terms of which is the more encompassing framework. Because the problem I have is when I sit down and I talk to people who are, anti-imperialists, etc., it's like, yeah, of course we recognize the problem that, non-white people have. However, really it's a class issue and race is just a component of that. And for me, things are completely the wrong way round. So if you flip it 180, that's a really good place to start. School yourself up about the history of white supremacy. It's not, 100, 200 years old. Marx is not a good place to start. You need to go much further back than Marx and Engels and the rest of the kind of Eurocentric discourse on this issue. Take it back into the so-called South American context. Take it back even further than that. Look at what was going on in Greece and Rome. Because if you want to talk about imperialism, that's the best place to talk, to begin the discourse and understand how some of the structures that started to emerge in the so-called Latin context actually have much earlier roots, even in European feudalism. There's books like Black Marxism by Cedric Robinson. Look at the Racial Contract by Charles Mills. I mean, if you give me your email address, I'll send you 1,000 books, not a problem. Yeah. So on that issue, I would offer, my advice is to flip the script by 180 on that one. That's a great place to start. In terms of what you said, Sukant, I want to respond to your response to me, that about the EDL and the brothers coming out and non-white people of color coming out. Well, to me, that's the problem. The problem is we only deal with crude, overt forms of white supremacy. That's why the British National Party come out and people start, oh yeah, get rid of the BNP, you got the anti-racist league and blah, 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 blah. And to me, that's not the problem. That's actually something that's put out there as a distraction for us. The real problem is that liberal, sophisticated, refined, neoliberal form that we want a piece of ourselves. The comfort zone. Of course. Because you raised this point that, and I totally agree with this, that for true global reparations to happen, we're going to have to give up something. The green agenda that's being pushed all the time is, you're going to have to cut emissions, etc., etc. We're all happy to do that because of this facile discourse that we're all human. Well, who gets to define what human means? Is it human to consume? Is it human to have an iPad? Is it human to wear designer jeans? I mean, how do you define the human? And this is picking up on the point that Jose is making. This really comes down to, and there's a technical term we're using, how we know what we know. These are really crucial issues because who gets to define who is human or what is human? At one time, it was Enlightenment scholars, or rather Enlightenment scholars. That's what it means to be human. What Descartes says, what Kant says, what Rousseau says, what John Stuart Mill says. They're the ones who get to define what the human is. And then we get assimilated into that discourse, and then we start saying, oh yeah, that's what it means to be human, and we look at ourselves and we're not that human, so they were right to classify us as subhuman. So, okay, I do accept that ultimately we're all part of one family, but in terms of using terminology and classifications, vocabulary and language, I think we need to pluralize the discourses. The best thing we can do is something like this and continue to have events like this so that we can talk with each other, we can share struggles, we can share the fact that, the white left 100% have something to contribute amongst white people. The problem is there. It's not 1%, by the way. It's 100% because we're all in this together. The ship goes down and everyone goes down with it. Black, white, red, yellow, brown, everyone goes down with it. But some people are captives and some people are in the galleys, rowing. So to understand, like the brother said, that's a really very good point, to maintain the consciousness that you are a leftist and a white leftist. And being a white leftist as opposed to a leftist or a radical or whatever is the club card that other people don't carry. And that club card is useful because it gets you into places that you need to get to, that we can't get to. Yeah? It's like somebody like with the Tesco's club card, you can do certain things. You don't have a Tesco's club card, you can't do certain things. So don't tear up your white supremacy card straight away, but use it as a race traitor.
Certainly one thing about Chavez, that's one of the reasons why we're here this evening, is that certainly what he did was he was the voice for the oppressed people, and he brought socialism back on the political agenda. And if there's any failings, it would be those of us who are from the colonised people, and certainly if I speak from the African perspective, African leaders didn't link up with him and work with him. He helped strengthen Cuba. This one, man in a government, of course he wasn't on his own, but it's part of a leadership. There was more that we could have done to strengthen that, and in itself it would strengthen many of our own countries. But the problem, if anything, with Africa and the Caribbean is the leadership.
Thank you, Sister. Any closing remarks, Brother Hugo, Sister Esther?
One thing is, you ask what can you do for the Basque people. First person to ask is Gary back there. If not, Tuesday, so this Tuesday, 6:30 in the Garden Court Chamber, Haldan of socialist lawyers or something organizes an event about Basque prisoners and the current political situation. That's the mark. And then I would like to continue our debate about what means being Basque and what means nation building. So that's for after.
Thank you.
I think I just want to respond to the question that Simeon raised around the challenges amongst each other and how we can overcome that. I think some of the challenges are what we call crab in a barrel syndrome. You know, the internal fighting amongst ourselves over small crumbs a lot of the time. Weaknesses in terms of identity, solidarity, organisation, ideology, the whole range of things. And also some of the stratifications of which class is one of those formations, but taking the point that that's housed within something bigger. Some of the own internal divisions that we have developed in our own societies and our own communities. These are some of the problems that we have. Collaborators, many of those who are colluding with the hegemon, with the same, you know, oppressive systems that we're talking about. What we need to do is we need to struggle against our own weaknesses, and that's one of the most fundamental struggles that we have. The self-reparation dimension to this. We also have to continue the struggle around decolonisation, and that's not just, it does begin with our minds. In fact, Professor Chinwezu has got a very good definition around reparations that basically talks about reparations as holistic repairs on every level, educationally, politically, culturally, socially, spiritually, etc. And then it ends with, but you know, first and foremost, it is about the rehabilitation of our minds. But the rehabilitation of our minds is also then about the fact that we exist as human people in society. And so it has to be then about decolonising all of our institutions, which again is a wider process. And I think it will then also have to look at what are the models that currently exist in terms of how we need to reconstruct our societies. And I think in many African majority societies, one of the struggles that we have is how do we build our nation states on the basis of plurality, the plurality of the various peoples within the nation state. And I think there's a lot that we can learn in terms of how it's being done in, you know, so-called Southern America and parts of the Caribbean, whose societies are made up on the basis of that plurality that we're also grappling with in terms of, you know, so-called negative ethnicity or colloquially tribalism, but we don't say that, that we are experiencing, and some of the conflicts and internal tensions that we're seeing in some of the modern nation states that we have in Africa in particular.
Thank you, Esther. Brother, do you want to say something else?
I'm concerned about I agree with when it comes to reparation, but a couple of things there. Us African, other oppressed people are suffering from double oppression. First, we're suffering from neo-colonial and imperialism. So I'm thinking, how do we get a reparation when our land doesn't belong to us, when we are landless people? How do we get a reparation when we have no power in order for us to proclaim our things? You know what I mean? So first of all, we are landless people, we ain't got the power. How do we get a reparation? Well, my point is, in order to get a reparation, we have to go a revolution, get back our land, gain power, and get our things back. That's my point of view.
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but it's also a process, and it happens at many different levels. And whilst there is a very violent, you know, overt, physically violent, there's also a wider structural violence that's going on. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact that part of how the powers that be maintain their power is through deception and through them appropriating, you know, if you like, our own psychic space, whereby we will actually put ourselves in a box without realising that we are free people and that we have to claim that. So that's why I emphasise this, if you like, the sovereignty begins with ourselves, and it begins with us reclaiming space epistemic space, sorry. It's ideological space, it's cultural space, it's political space, it's physical space as well. So I'm not discounting what you're saying, but what I'm saying is because this is a huge thing, it's a global thing, it has to happen at many different levels, and we have to be able to operate and link those different struggles at all those different levels at the same time if we are going to unhinge this system and create that revolution that you're talking about.
Thank you for that, sister. So just closing remark. I'd like to thank particularly the two young girls, sisters that we have. Thanks for your patience, for being so quiet. You know, we should really put on a better program so we can involve you and your interest as well. So I apologise for that. But you've been fantastic for the last couple of hours. Thank you. And thank you to your mother who's obviously raised you in a very righteous way as well. But anyway, just to thank everyone in the room for an excellent conversation, I thought. There will be events coming up. We have Brother Sohail Dolatsai, who wrote a book called Black Star Crescent Moon, about the influence of the Muslim International in black radical struggles in the United States, who will be coming next month. And hopefully we'll be promoting his new book at Houseman's Bookshop, hopefully on Saturday, 8th of June. And also, I haven't discussed it with Sister Esther yet, but there's ideas on the 15th of June, which is a Saturday, hopefully at the Africa Centre in Covent Garden. That's yet to be confirmed. We'll have a conference solely about the challenges at the moment of AFRICOM and the attempts of recolonization of Africa by imperialism and Africa's allies' response in defense of that. But anyway, just in conclusion, we salute the Irish revolutionaries of yesteryear and those continue to struggle to bring an end to British rule in Ireland and to establish a socialist Irish republic there. And also, obviously, we all send a salute to Chavez and all the ancestors to which he's joined. Thank you for everyone attending and look forward to the food.